And look at that, we're live now.
Alrighty. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Take Flight, the show that helps new designers get their dreams off the runway and into the sky. I'm your flight attendant, Cat, and I am delighted to introduce you to our crew for this flight. There we go. We have got in the pilot seat, we have a TTRPG designer who has worked on some short form games. Dredge is probably the most popular one, and is looking to work on a longer game. Lover of mechs, cats, and putting too much work into fictional tarot systems, we have Zoe.
Woo!
Woo! Hello, Zoe. I'm so thrilled to have you.
I'm happy to be here.
And here in the co-pilot seat, and also in the back of the plane at the same time, we have Kegan. KeganExe is the award-winning designer behind titles like In Extremis, Blister City, and the upcoming Campfire Scouts. You can find them on this very channel as one half of Cult EXE. Kegan, thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Get off this.
You're the heel of this episode?
I'm the heel of this episode, I think.
I love that for you.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm so excited about this. Because as I try to find perfect matches, and I was reading through, I was like, I need a weird kid.
Hey,
I'm holding out for a weird kid till the end of the night. And then I read about Ichorus, which is Zoe's project, and I thought, gotta be strong, gotta be fast, gotta be fresh from the fight. Listener, it's a million degrees. I'm short-circuiting, and that's great for me and for you. So, Zoe, I would love for you to briefly, beyond my intro. Oh, wrong. Before we get started, a brief safety demonstration. In case of an emotional emergency, please familiarize yourself with the exits to the stream and assist yourself before helping others. On today's flight, we may be passing through areas of violence, body horror, blood, and religious themes. We value your comfort and safety here at Take Flight Airlines, so if these conditions would be unsafe for you, please feel free to join us for another flight. Okay. Now, Zoe, I would love for you to tell the audience more about yourself and about Angel Eyes Games.
So I have been designing games for I don't remember how long, maybe a couple of years. I have mostly worked on smaller scale, like solo journaling or like letter writing games. Like you said, Dredge is probably the one that people would know the most. Not to be confused with like the video game Dredge, which has a very similar aesthetic. It's not the same thing. They're not related. My like, I almost said gamer identity. My game creating sort of brand, I guess, used to have a complicated name. It was like a palindrome using the like word or the name Skilla, but I realized it was just too complicated to spell out and nobody ever knew how to pronounce it, including me. So I changed it to Angel Eyes Games because I think that angel aesthetics are cool. And yeah, I'm working on a new, more long form kind of a daunting project game, and it's kind of a territory I've never stepped into before.
Hell yeah, we love a daunting game.
We love a daunting game. That's also why you're here, is because we've had a lot of designers on this show before who were writing their first ever TTRPG, or very close to their first ever TTRPG. But a lot of you watching in chat, or a lot of you watching the VOD, may be experienced designers looking to branch out into something a little different from what you're used to. And that's also a great time to seek guidance from people. And it can be a big step. So I'm so excited to be asking Kegan for wisdom about this. Kegan, I would love for you to tell us all about your gamer persona, please.
Oh no. Oh god, what do I do with gamer persona?
Tell us about the Kegan and the games, please.
Yeah, hi. I had such a good intro, and I feel like that basically said everything already. But yeah, I've been writing games for however long COVID's been. I don't want to think about it. It's been
Yep,
longer
yep,
than
yep.
I'd like. um, but yeah, I've been writing games for a while. I am currently working on the biggest thing I've ever worked on. And I feel like I've learned a lot in that process.
Oh boy, howdy. Boy to the howdy. So now comes chat. I'd love for you to join in on this. Now comes the time where we ask Zoe a lot of questions about Ichorus. We're going to start off with, Zoe, can you please give me and Kegan and Chad and Kegan and me the elevator pitch for Ichorus, please? I want to hear everything.
Okay. So, do you want a super condensed version of this, or do you want my long, like, poetic-y paragraph?
Oh no,
Medium condensed.
Medium condensed. So, basic idea is that in Ichorus or Ichorus, however you say it, it works either way. Players take on the role of a web of people whose minds are kind of spectrally linked. And they do that by consuming holy ichor found in giant abandoned shells of gods that once were. And the game specifically takes place on the city known as Saber, once the god of swords, run by a tyrannical sort of blade guard who run the city through coercion, supposed holy communion, etc. And as such, oppose all who would imbibe the god's ichor without official approval.
Oh,
that's like maybe the sickest like 4 sentences I've ever heard.
right?
That has like such a vibe.
Right?
I like to start with aesthetics and work from there. Usually, like 90% of the time, the aesthetics are influenced by Dishonored. I am a huge nerd about that. I will bring it up at any chance. And this game is no exception.
It's true.
Talking about the mechanics spinning out of it, and I guess just to get like right into it, right before this, you sent me this picture of these dice, the dice tree, which has Ichor, body, emotion, and mind on it. It's up on chat now, so people can actually see it. Oh no, I'm super quiet. I'll just talk louder. Oh, it's because I turned my gain way down. That's my bad. Anyway, yeah, talk to us about this dice tree real quick.
Yeah, so this is something very new to me, working with dice that are more complicated than like a couple of rolls in a game. Essentially, the idea that I had is that players, because they're like sort of an interconnected consciousness of people, they have their individual roles and as well as like group roles, like you might see in like Beam Saber or Blades in the Dark, things like that. So in this case, the method I was considering so far was having kind of beginning a session by rolling a central dice. That's kind of like almost like a luck score for the session, you know, because it could be anything. It could be a 6, it could be a 1. And you place that kind of at the center, and each of the 4 sides kind of corresponds to an attribute. So each of those attributes would represent challenges. So if you're facing a mind-based situation, so if you're trying to figure out, you know, how smart is my character in this moment, trying to like recall a piece of history or something like that, you would be using that side of the dice. So essentially, players, when they're acting individually, would roll their own dice when they're, you know, trying to accomplish something difficult, and add it to the previous dice on that side of the dice tree. So they would start with the central dice, but then you add your dice to, you know, the mind part branch of it, and then the next dice would be added to the one after that. And players like different classes or whatever word I end up going with for those would maybe affect future roles that their, almost said coworkers, their fellow players would add on to their kind of branch of the tree. And then the idea is that when players are acting as a group, when they are using their networked consciousnesses to accomplish something, you take all of the dice from that branch of the tree and you roll them together to accomplish something great. And there's a different set of rules for figuring out if you succeed there. My big questions kind of regarding that system, because I don't have experience, creating this sort of thing, is, first of all, isn't that too confusing? Because I know that it's like a very physical arrangement of dice as opposed to other systems. I mean, obviously I would include, if you aren't playing in person, you can just like draw out a diagram, just write this, whatever number you get in the center, and then go on each of the forward branching sides. But I know it's also just kind of weird. And so I guess I'm not the best at explaining it. It will probably make more sense when it is written out, but just from like a brief explanation, does any of that make sense? Is there anything that's like immediately you think that doesn't sound fun?
No, you're making like a domino style like tree as you roll.
Yeah, exactly.
And then eventually the group rolls the whole thing.
That makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. It sounds really cool. It's going to be one of those things, probably, that like lives and dies on how well you're able to explain it quickly, which like is just sort of the deal with like bigger, more, I don't know, arcane mechanics like this one, and like not arcane negative, just like bizarre and things people haven't seen sort of mechanics like this, which I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's very easy to. I think it sounds like one of those mechanics where you'd like play it once and you'd be like, even if you couldn't remember the name of the game, it'd be like, do you remember that game where the big line of dice, which is like really cool. It gives people like an immediate way to talk about the game, even if they don't necessarily remember like all the details of it, which like rocks.
Yeah, I'm absolutely a fan. And also what you've done here with what Kegan has showing to chat is like, keep doing that all the time, constantly, because if you're doing a very visual mechanic, explain it visually. Use diagrams to your best advantage, and you will find that I think this actually seems pretty intuitive.
Yeah, I feel like, I don't feel like it's like a super complicated, at least like on first glance, like not like over complicated, impossible to understand sort of mechanic.
And like personally, as usually like a GM for my group, I tend to prefer systems that are way not crunchy, not numbers based. I don't have to keep track of a billion things. So my goal would be to have this dice tree system be the most complicated thing that there is. And then like everyone's different, classes or whatever, is more focused on flavor and like, having very broad moves rather than like, oh, I add +2 numbers to this and that and having to keep track of that. So this is like the most crunchy part of the system that I'm looking at.
Yeah, it's really nifty. I think it's cool crunch, but also like because it has such a physical presence on the table, it's not something you really have to like commit to memory. It's not gonna be like, okay, well they rolled a 4 last time and then they rolled a 2, because like it's just sort of in front of you as a record of play, which is like a really cool way to handle a crunchy mechanic. Like it has its own sort of memory to it.
Yeah. And I also think that like going with this is the crunchy thing and everything else is kind of bending toward it is a very good instinct, because that's going to make your whole game kind of much easier to grasp.
Yeah. Is there any thought about, I know you were talking about there's like multiple classes, and like maybe we're not far enough in design yet for this, so if the answer is I don't know, no big issue. But are there going to be other ways for people to interact with this dice tree? Because it seems really cool, and it just immediately feels like one of those things where I'd want to poke it as much as possible.
Yeah. I like, okay, so full disclosure, with the system, I actually got super far in. I was designing different classes and I had like a character sheet and everything set up. And then I looked at the rules that I had in place and I was like, this, like I just said, I don't like running super crunchy, super like rules heavy games where I have to constantly be flipping through the rule book. No offense to those games. They're still awesome and fun. It's just my memory is not great. And I realized that there was just too much going on in it. And so I completely reworked it. So I have classes that are based on aesthetics and like, I still went with like emotion and Ichor, which is like the magic powers and things like that. So the classes are based on those. I haven't figured out like all of the intricate ways that things will interact with the tree, but definitely that's going to be a part of it, is like, and again, being able to affect other players' roles, I think, is something that I would like to be a big part of it, because the game is focused on this like interconnected network of consciousnesses.
Yeah.
I think it's important to that's actually, I don't want to jump into giving all these questions, but I'm a little bit on the fence about how much I want to lean into like group roles and like players relying on each other, because to me that's fun. I love when I'm in a game or when I'm jamming a game, I love finding out everything I can about the other players, and I like my roles benefiting them. I play a lot of support characters in games, and so that's really fun for me. I don't know if it's a more general appeal. I don't know how heavily I should lean on to like players relying on each other or helping each other for their roles.
I think legitimately some of the best advice I've ever been given here is just like figuring out who it is that you're designing for. Like, are you designing for players who play like you? Because if so, and like, it's not bad if the answer to this question is no, right? But like, if so, if you're designing for people who have the same thoughts as you and like play the same sorts of games as you, yeah, lean into it as hard as you can. Like, if that's the thing that seems interesting to you and you are your sort of market, hell yeah, go for it.
Yeah. This is said literally once an episode on Take Flight. It's like, there's nothing wrong with designing a game that's for you, and if other people like it, and they will, cool, great.
I also think there's not anything wrong with designing for a person who
True.
isn't you. Like, I think I think a lot of my own design has been, oh no, I'm still quiet. That's sad.
No.
I'll figure it out as we go. I'm hitting red on Streamlabs, so I don't know what's up with it. Anyway, yeah, I think like a lot of my own design has been for like, I love writing solo games. I hate playing solo games. And a lot of that has been like, I have to figure out like who the solo game player is who I am designing for. And that's like that's like a whole thing sometimes. But I don't know, that's such a roundabout answer to your question. But like no,
it's helpful.
The answer's not yeah, I was like, it's not a like easy answer, but also like it's not an easy question.
Well, it sounds like I feel like this has helped me figure out that like I should decide, am I going to lean into this is what I like, and so this is for people who enjoy the things that I do. And I think that I would like to, just because I and at least a couple of the people who I play with all the time, we are always support players in the games that we play. And so I think that makes sense to me, that like I feel like I could lean into that.
Yeah, and it's so easy then. Like, okay, this is a game I have designed for myself, and I would like this game because I'm a support player. Also, just really easily becomes a way to talk about who would be interested in playing this game when it's done, right? Like, this is a game I wrote for a party of healers. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
it immediately gives it like such a sense of like who would be interested in this game that I feel like a lot of RPG designers have a really hard time with. Like, instead of defining it in terms of like, I feel like you see a lot of games defined in terms of like, this is a game that's not D&D this way, and it's not ever nearly as good of a sell as like, this is a game for people who like supporting each other, or this is a game for people who like playing healers in XYZ.
Yeah, I have got a question for Zoe. You mentioned your first draft that you are largely jettisoning, but my question is, what in there do you most wish you could keep? Like, what in there do you feel most like you nailed, even if the overall product wasn't really what you needed?
I mean, a lot of it, like, I like I said, I work a lot with like aesthetics first. So I did write a significant amount of just like general world lore stuff, god stuff that I am planning on keeping. I may have to tweak a little bit depending on like what I name the different systems and stuff. But that I am very attached to because that was kind of just me figuring out the world. Things that I have to jettison that I like I said, I created like a character sheet, and I am not a brilliant graphic designer, as you can probably tell from the graphic from before.
It works. What do you want?
And I worked a while on getting like a character sheet that I thought looked smooth and like easily readable and like cool. I thought it looked cool. And I'm really struggling with like, I like in my heart, I just kind of want to rework it and like remove some things, but I think I might have to get rid of the whole thing. And that is sad to me. I feel like I need to let it go. I don't want to, but I just because of the amount of time that I spent on it. But with what I'm going with, I think I'm going to have to get rid of it because it had a bunch of different like stats and stuff. And I just don't want to use those anymore. I don't want to add all these different layers.
It's rough, but like sometimes you really have to just kill your darlings.
Yeah.
Well, what I tend to do is like I copy everything. I have this huge like Google Doc where I just everything that I've ever had to get rid of in my writing, I just paste it all there. And I'll like odds are I will never look at it again. And it is also incredibly long now, this document. But it's like it makes it just a little bit easier for me to kill that part of my writing, you know?
Yeah, you're burying it in the Google Doc graveyard. I have that in my notes app. I feel you. Google Docs boneyard. Yeah, Josh, same brain. Yeah, that. At least you're not having to come here and have me tell you, hey, you should have to kill that.
Yeah.
Because I love telling people you got to erase that. I'm so sorry.
I mean, it would be fair. It's like, and you know, sometimes I'm terribly indecisive. Sometimes I wish there was someone looking over my shoulder and going, actually, you should get rid of that bit because I can never pick. I can never decide. I'm
notorious for just like being like this 50-page bit here sucked. I'm just gonna remove it. Which like maybe isn't the best way to work, but like I don't know. I feel like sometimes you just gotta erase everything and start over. But
okay, what's a Chat, do you have a good question for Zoe? I'll ask. I have so many questions.
Go for it.
Okay. I would love to hear more about your classes. Because you seem excited about them, and I want to hear why.
Again, like originally the system was very different. So they were kind of each based on like the attributes that I had there, which I narrowed down extremely for this tree. So that aspect of them is gone, but like aesthetically, they each kind of focus on, because it's like a networked consciousness, they each kind of focus on a different sense, kind of. So the idea of the player characters is that they have, and this is where we get maybe a little bit, I don't know if it qualifies as body horror, but it's like body modification, things like that. Like, they have like specific hardware to process basically the raw magic and influx of information from Ichor like installed, and they then get like linked through consuming the god's Ichor. And so the different types of hardware and the different like roles that people perform within that network contribute to what like class they have. Another aspect of that is like for flavor's sake, I wrote on the character sheet, and then there's a bunch of stuff in different class descriptions about this, where you should figure out what kind of god your Ichor came from was. So like there's a class that is very focused on using Ichor itself, which is basically the magic of this world. And that class is based a lot around having kind of a spectral, larger form that you can adopt based on the god that the Ichor you drink comes from. So, you know, if you drink the Ichor of like a god of the sea or something, maybe all of the magic that you use or your big form will be like rushing water or something like that. I have kind of, again, like based on different attributes, like one class that is very like focused on talking to other people, like gets bonuses, specifically something that I don't like in things like D&D and stuff like that, specifically getting bonuses based on if somebody is trying to attack you, if you try to talk to them, you will succeed more with this class, hopefully. Because it always frustrates me when a system tries to force the players to engage in conflict as soon as like somebody appears, you know? And so I really like the idea of a class focused on trying to like basically de-escalate those situations. Just, I guess things like that, just kind of each focused on a different sort of like attribute on this tree, and like fulfilling a different role, I guess.
Okay.
That rocks.
That does. It absolutely does. I love this approach of just being like here are things I don't like in games. Here are classes that are built to provide an experience that's more in line with what I like. That is a stellar instinct, and I think you're right to feel good about that class, because that's good. I have some questions for you from chat, because Josh has questions for you in chat. How many sessions or campaign length are you thinking this game might last? Shorter, longer, one-shots? Are there mechanics that only start to blossom as you play more?
So this is kind of one of the big challenges of working on this, is that in the past I've focused mostly on games that are like one session or a couple of sessions, not very long term. The goal of this one is to make it more of a long-term thing, like something that would be like the campaign length I run with my friends, where it's like maybe a few months or something like that. So in terms of like what would be tied to that, is I'm considering doing like class progression, you know, where you get experience or whatever over time and you get more moves and things like that. I tend to enjoy that in games, and I feel like it's something that would be pretty straightforward. So yeah, there's probably going to be like level progression and things like that. And specifically, I wanted to include a sheet or something like that for the collective group itself, so you could take group moves. So over time, hopefully, depending on whether you as a group want to be closer or moving more individualistically, you could take different moves to support that.
That's fun. So that's like the same sort of like general ideas like Forged in the Dark, like
Yeah.
crew there, where they're potentially taking upgrades next to the players, which is great. That's like a bit of design I'm constantly stuck on.
Yeah.
But just like it does feel, I think, very rewarding. Amusingly, this is the thing I was talking about earlier today. It's like progression in like not necessarily like personal character progression, but like progressing a crew or like progressing where you live or like helping out other NPCs is like a form of class progression. I think it's like sick.
Yeah. Yep. Fully agreed. And I think tied to that, and Josh also wanted to know, what kind of investment, time, emotional ability, advancement, etc., do you see the characters having? Is this a game where you really focus on and get attached to one character, or are PCs kind of expendable?
So, personally, and this is, you know, I've been iffy about whether I'm making this game like for me or whatever, but I will not compromise on this. I love getting very attached to characters, and creating lore and stories for them. So the goal, I'm talking about like the team functioning as like a network and things. Ideally, what I think is that each player would probably only control like one person, but then you're able to maybe, depending on like what actions you take as a group, offer to add somebody to the group, and then they would become like a part of that, but more of like a background resource you could call on. Like you might have a move that could say, use one of your contacts to accomplish this. Like you could have a vehicle or something like that. So that would be more of like a resource to pull on. The primary focus would be on each player controlling one character. Hopefully you'd get very invested. One way that I have thought of making that kind of more of a focus is, in like D&D, there's like long rests. In Monster of the Week, just sort of between missions you can heal and things like that. And I've kind of struggled with what I want to do to kind of accomplish the same thing in this game. And what I landed on is I like the idea of, I think like I called it like a resync or something like that. Basically the party has to rest together. And when they do that, they like, maybe like drink new Ichor or something like that. And the function of this is that their minds like resync, reconnect. And so I would like to have a mechanic where every time you do that, there's a chance that like one person's memory or like a nightmare based on their past or something slips out. And so they have to describe it to the group. Because I love juicy things like when my GM brings up like a terrible moment in my character's backstory, and it's like revealed to the whole group. And so I would love to create little ways for that to like come out, for everybody to have to deal with it.
Do you have thoughts about how you're going to do that? Because I have just like an immediate game came to mind when you mentioned it.
I have like vague thoughts, but I haven't written out, and I haven't written it out, and I would love to hear if you have like any specific ones.
Okay, so the game The Between, which is one of the Gauntlets RPGs games, has this system called unscenes, and sort of like a big deal in the game is you don't talk in character. You do not talk to other characters about your backstory. And what happens is during downtimes, you go through these unscenes, which is like guided questions sort of for each characters. But it does seem sort of like these nightmare bits and stuff like that, where you sort of like get to know the characters by their downtime or through these flashbacks, sort of in the same direction of it. And I think there's a cool bit of like parallel thought here. I'll find a link for it in a bit. But unscenes are like one of those things that you're seeing pop up in sort of a bunch of games recently, because I think it sort of dovetails nicely into both talking about having cool ways to talk about the setting where the GM doesn't have to necessarily have all the answers immediately, but also like providing cool character backstory and providing like clear spots for players to like have a moment to sort of make it about themselves.
That sounds really cool.
Yeah. I just gotta reiterate that I love this instinct you have, where it's like, this is what I like in game, I'm building my game toward that. This is what I don't like in game, I'm building my game specifically away from that. Like this is something that I often advise people to do, is just like think about specifically the kind of experiences you treasure when role playing. And so I love hearing you talk about that kind of design, because it's very strong and very good stuff.
I do have a question. I know we were saying we wanted to largely keep the same characters around, which sounds wonderful. With them being like networked, are there thoughts about what happens if a player dies? Because it feels like my first thought was I cannot imagine somebody dying if I were networked to them.
Yeah, I had like a lot of stuff for that written out when I was working with the system before that I tossed out. But I want to keep like the bones of that, which is that when somebody dies, I don't want it to just be super easy for that to happen.
Yeah.
I think it should be a super significant event. So like I had it written out where like that player could like describe a memory that gets given to like each other player in the network as their character is like taking their last breath, something like that. I think it would be cool to do something like that and have it so they have that lasting impression. I hesitate to like give like any sort of negative like trait or penalty or something to the group if that were to happen. But I like the idea of it being a potential like emotional thing that the characters have to be impacted by. So I like the idea of like a memory like lingering with them or something like that, or maybe like everybody gets a different like as the consciousness like dissolves, everybody gets a piece of that. I have to figure it out more specifically now that I'm like reworking it, like statistically how it works. But that's like the gist of it, is that I feel like each player should have a piece of that.
Yeah, that's a cool
person.
Oh yeah, I like that.
That's a really cool take on it. Because I know you don't want characters to die, and if the answer is, hey, characters can't die in this game, like there are plenty of other bad things that can happen to a character that aren't death, and we're not interested in exploring that. Like, cool, that's wonderful too, I think. But I do think there's something really cool about like each of them takes a piece of the character. Like I think like you said, I think being like, oh, they're mechanically disadvantaged from this point forward would be like, it would feel bad.
It would definitely feel bad. It would, and also I think there's there's something a little weak about that kind of thing too, where it's just like, yeah, my friend just died, so I got a -2. It's like
kicking you while you're down.
Yeah.
And it's not even kicking you very hard. Like I got a -2 because my friend died is so anticlimactic and so not impactful, even though it's trying to describe an impact that is happening to you.
Yeah, there's a piece of them still in the network. It's just such a cool approach to that.
Yeah, that is so good. I have more questions from Josh. In response to kind of the previous answers when we were talking about level progression, how long you stick with a character, what kind of level progression or pacing are you picturing? Do you think that there will be a moment in a character's growth where they basically win? Thinking along the lines of in Blades or Fortune in the Dark, where you get 46 to anything and nothing really matters after that, lol. Are we thinking about more horizontal? And I think what Josh means by that is like characters get broader as they grow, they get more different abilities, or vertical character growth where they just get better at their existing abilities to like a much larger extent. Like what are we thinking about as characters grow in this game?
Based on like what you just said, horizontal definitely matches more with what I was thinking of. I like systems like Monster of the Week where experience is somewhat tied to like the challenges that you face, and like you get those questions at the end of the session. So I have written like, did we I haven't written somewhere here, but like, did we confront like a physical challenge? Did we confront a social challenge? So like experience would potentially be gained through something like that of just facing different challenges. And then the goal would be to have different players get different moves for their characters. One thing that I considered, it seems weird to me, like people may exploit it, and I'd really have to think about it. I considered that since players are going to be, playing as a network of consciousnesses, one option when they like level up or whatever would be for two characters to like swap a move from their different like playbooks. Because I like the idea, there's like multi-classing or whatever in different systems. I like the idea of it being like a team effort. Like maybe you worked so closely with this other person that like parts of their consciousness have like imprinted on your consciousness. So that would be one way for them to like get something totally new that could be used by their character without it being like super overpowered or like I win as a character now. I mean, eventually I feel like people would be able to do so many cool things, I guess, with having like a sheer number of moves that they may end up, I mean, like, I like the idea though of facing bigger and bigger challenges. So I feel like that's just a way to approach it. One other thing is that each class, they have like a bunch of like moves tied to what they do in general, like if they're like the face of the group, That's one of the classes. Then they have a bunch of moves for like talking with people and stuff like that. But each class has a specific core thing that they can do. So the one that I talked about previously, that's like very Ichor focused, they can like take on their god form. That's like their special class thing where they're like the only person in the group that can do that. And there are different moves specifically tied to that. So like when you level up, you could take something that gives your form more options for how it appears. And that's something that you couldn't trade with another person in the group because they don't have access to that. So I feel like that might be a way to preserve like that individuality while still having the group be connected. And that's, I think, more, I guess, vertical, however you think about it. But hopefully, because again, I want to stay away from like super hardcore numbers in the different moves and stuff. Hopefully it'll just be more of like tools in a toolbox rather than, now I have a super powerful sword that kills everything.
I love that every time I'm about to have a question, you immediately have an answer for it before I can get to it.
Wow.
Which is incredible.
It's because I talk so much.
No, that's great.
Well,
that's wonderful. I was about to ask about, because move swapping is really cool, and it feels like a cool, like, maybe like a crew advance, because it seems like that's a possible thing you're doing here. But I was going to be like, the issue with taking moves from other playbooks has historically been it's very easy to start stepping on other players' toes. And then before I could say it, you were like, but I think everyone's going to have a thing that you can't take. And I was like, damn, beat me to it.
The magic player in me is like, what if an ability gets stronger for everybody in the hive mind that has it? Because that's a very magic card thing that would happen.
That's really cool, actually. I'm literally noting that because I think that's a really fun like synergy thing because you have to agree as players on that. And I feel like I have to include like a note at the beginning of the rule set to only play with people that you trust and want to talk about stuff like that with. That is actually really cool.
There was a note at the start of this where you were worried about people like potentially abusing the mechanic, and I think one of the strongest things you could do as a game designer is not designing around like a worst case scenario.
Yeah,
like
not caring about that is so powerful.
The players who are going to who find that mechanic and abuse it are going to find another mechanic to abuse. There isn't really like a way to design around the worst possible reading of your rules. And I think sometimes the strongest thing there is just to ignore it and do the thing that sounds fun to you.
And plus, as somebody who loves White Wolf's Scion, sometimes playing a game that's not well balanced and breaking it and being big and way, way, way too cool and powerful is its own kind of fun experience that is also rewarding and engaging and delightful.
A thing that happened on a +1 stream to me is Tony wrote a class for In Extremis that when they kill a character, they can like take over their body and they get their health and they get their abilities. And it was like, cool, this is great. This is a lot of fun. And then Tony blew up a spaceship with it and went, hey, how much health did that spaceship have? And I was like, damn, should I design around that? But like, honestly, Tony having 50 health while everyone else had 4 was just like a lot of fun, and I think sometimes you just leave it in. I think it's just real fun.
That's
fair
because that stuff rules a little bit. We had a point in a Scion game once where our GM was trying to do a cutscene where people like stepped out of a helicopter onto a rooftop and said some ominous stuff. But this is a game about playing the Children of Gods, and I could interact with any electronics I could see, so I stopped the helicopter from taking off again, and I could throw as far as I could see, so I pelted them with billiard balls until Dave ran up the side of the building and fought them. And like, that wasn't what was intended, and it was massively disruptive, but I still remember it, and we all still laugh about it because it was very fun. Like,
yeah, I mean, I have like very fond memories of figuring out wacky shit in Lancer, like cooperating with my teammates. Like one of them had a huge force field that was powerful, but they couldn't move. But my mech had this like attachment that lets it drag another mech. So I just like attached my mech to their mech and dragged it around. And like that was, I don't think that the developers intended that. I think that's a really good point. I feel like I'm super overly cautious when I'm writing because I am always thinking like, oh man, but how is this going to be abused? But I do have like good memories like that. So I see what you're saying about like not flinching away from the possibility of something crazy happening.
Yeah, you don't flinch from
sense.
a bad thing happening, right? Or not like a bad thing, like a fun thing like that happening. And then I think like the important thing when you're doing this is to be like, okay, well, what if somebody abuses this in a way that's not fun? And the answer to that isn't to mechanize the game around the bad player. The answer is like including strong safety tools.
Yes. And I would also, this is something I'm constantly saying, is that there's two different kinds of broken game. There's a broken game like Scion, where pretty much every character archetype can do something massively disruptive and bizarre that is way too powerful for the fiction of the game. And there's a broken game like D&D, where there are some character archetypes that are so wildly out of step with the rest that players are actually more limited in their choices. Because like there's a correct way to play D&D. And it is less fun if you don't play a wizard.
It's a warlock, but that's fine.
Yeah. That's if you don't play a caster,
yeah.
Kegan. And so like the first type of broken, I would argue, is good actually.
Mm-hmm.
It's fun broken.
Yeah. The kind of broken you need to be worried about is if you're presenting only one option that's powerful. Yeah. That's when you need to be worried. The other kind is good. I got no problem with the other kind. I'm good with it.
Yeah.
And that's why I feel like I that's part of why I guess I want to keep things broad in their wording rather than working with a bunch of specific numbers with different moves, is because like you were saying with D&D, it's like you can statistically like add things up and say, well, this class does more damage through this and that. And I don't want that to be a thing where like you can add up the numbers of a class and say that they are specifically better. Although I guess part of that comes from the focus on combat, which I have a difficult experience with like working around. I think it makes sense to not stress too much also because I'm not going to be, I'm not going to be giving somebody a +10 to something.
Yeah. Hey, do other groups use the term math hammer, or is that just my group?
I think that
I've never heard it before,
but
I mean,
makes immediate sense.
Yeah. Like you can math hammer D&D.
Yeah.
You could math hammer out a D&D character that is statistically flawless.
I think, and here's a fun thing too, is I think other games have characters and archetypes that are honestly fairly clearly better than the rest. Like, and this is like no offense, because I think it can be a lot of fun if that is a thing you just sort of allow to happen and you aren't like, so my specific example, Slayers has a class that if you keep rolling well, you will never stop doing damage. You could theoretically like one-turn combat sometimes with the Slayers character. But also, I think in Slayers, part of the point of the game is sometimes like, hey, this broke and it was fun. This broke and we had fun anyway, right?
Yeah, that's because that's Spencer all the way down.
Yeah, no, but like the idea here being that like, even if something isn't mechanically balanced, like as long as like the issue with it in D&D is if things aren't mechanically balanced, the game doesn't work and it's less fun for everybody else. And I think like, if you're not having a game that focuses exclusively on combat, that's like not really the same sort of concern, right? When other people are like, okay, well, most of my abilities are narrative, or when you're not just adding +1s and +2s to things, that sort of balance just really sort of goes out the window in a cool way.
Yeah.
I think that makes sense. It's like the fun kind of broken again, where it's something that's cool if you figure it out. And if you're playing with a group of people who want to just do fun, cool stuff and not, a D&D adventuring party who wants to kill as many goblins as possible.
Exactly.
Because they keep building forts.
And stealing all the forks.
Stealing all the everything. This is my new favorite getting to know you question, chat, is that before we got on, I asked if you were a goblin, what would you do that would get a D&D party called on you?
Josh in the chat, just going to take the opportunity to recommend Apocalypse Keys for great unbalanced move design. I mean, they're impeccably balanced, but you're throwing around some serious nonsense the best way possible. Yeah, Apocalypse Keys is really good, Josh. Keep talking
Apocalypse
about
Keys is really good. We know. Yeah, it's true, though. It's true. It's absolutely true. We have just about hit the time where it's time for Cat and Kegan to stop asking Zoe questions, and for Zoe to start asking Cat and Kegan and chat questions. And chat can also ask Kegan questions.
Oh no.
We can all ask Kegan questions.
I do have a bunch of questions.
It's your time. It's your time to ask the questions. Now that we have a better idea of what you're going for.
So one of like the big questions that I have, because I have not done really any rule sets that are like supposed to be, months long campaigns or anything like that. How much stuff do I need to include? Like, I'm wondering if I should include things like, if the players want to buy this list of stuff, like if they want to acquire, a specific weapon or something, how much does it cost? Like, you see tables for those in different games. Obviously I want to include like lore for the game because I think that's fun. And as like a GM, I like to work with that. But I'm not sure like what different components are super necessary. Like I also see sample missions in different rule books, and I'm not sure if that's like an expected norm or if that's just something that can be there or not. Like what would you expect to see, I guess, is my question.
Okay, one sec. I'm writing these down because this is 3 distinct questions, which isn't bad.
But listen,
I will lose.
I fucking hate it.
I will lose the bits of it as we go. Okay, so first the question of like, what stuff do you want in the game? What's too much stuff? Unfortunately, the answer for this is it's very hard to tell until you are sort of like at the playtesting part of the game, which like nobody wants to hear. But
yeah, the right amount of stuff, Zoe, is
yeah, the right amount of stuff is unfortunately the right question. No, I have found the best way when you're doing something bigger like this is to just get to like to a barely playable version of the game, right? Like, here are the basic mechanics of it. Here's 3 character classes, 1 for each of the players, right? And then you take it to a table, and every time as a DM you find yourself having to make something up, you write it down, and those are the things the game needs to include, right? And like, I don't think I have ever written commerce into a game. Like, I don't think I've ever been like, here's gold, here's how much stuff costs, because at my table, if someone's like, hey, I'd like to buy a gun, I'm like, great, you talk to a guy and get a gun, right? Because I don't think it's going to be the most interesting bit for me. And if
I have played one interesting game with shopping.
Oh, hi, Sarah's here. Yeah, but like, so the answer to that question is, unfortunately, and sort of fortunately here, right? You're designing for a player who is yourself, which makes it a little easier. And the answer to this is, when you find yourself at sticking points, or you find yourself having to make up things, just write down what they are, and then later you can expand on them. And then next time you playtest it, if you don't find yourself using it, maybe it's a smaller bit you include. If you find yourself still needing more, you add more to it. Unfortunately, like everything, the answer is playtest it. Lore. We were talking about including it, not including it, stuff like that. The best advice I have ever received on lore comes from Aaron King, who told me, I don't want to read a sentence in a book that I cannot spin I cannot spin a session out of. Right? So I have found, and it's really been helpful for me, has been the bits of lore I include in games are things where I can read it and within a sentence or two go, okay, that's today's session. So like smaller evocative bits great. And if you want to include a lot of lore, as long as it's all evocative and it's all stuff that people might read and go, oh, cool, that's a session. Great. But you probably don't need to include, like, you know, the genealogy of the ruling family. Like, it's very... I'm very guilty of overwriting stuff that to me seems really important and then going back and looking at it and being like, this is nothing.
Yeah.
And then talking about starter adventures. I love a starter adventure. I think they're a really good way to tell people what the game is about and introduce both the players and the GM to sort of the setting and the mechanics in a way that, like, you'd, like, sort of take the rails off as it goes. So starting, like, maybe starting in a smaller spot and, like, opening it up, or, like, slowly introducing factions if you have them, or introducing, like, the important bits of the story that they can then build on. And I don't think every game needs it, but I think games, especially like this one, where there's, like, a lot of lore and it's interesting and it might not be like something people have read before, I think including a starter adventure, even if it's just really simple, even if it's a few paragraphs about, like, hey, for your first session, maybe consider, like, XYZ, really helps as someone who, like, runs a game.
And one thing I've taken to doing instead of or in addition to starter campaigns is just plot hooks.
Mm-hmm.
Just a list of, like, things that may be the thing that gets your party together, and just leaving space for a GM to wing it after that. It's not only much easier on you to write, but it feels it's easier for a GM to improvise off of. So I'm all about those.
That actually is really helpful for, like, the next thing that I was going to bring up.
Oh, good.
Which is, like, having a direction.
Also, only Ryutama has good shopping because you can buy cute items specifically because they are cute.
Yeah, if you're going to include shopping, add cute tags to everything.
Yes.
Just put the type of shopping. Is it cute shopping? Cool shopping?
Yes.
Unironically, yes.
Yes.
If fashion is the end game, include.
Yeah. My Ryutama group went from town to town collecting merch of local mascots.
I love that.
That was their thing. And it ruled. Like, it's the only time I've ever played a game where shopping has mattered or been interesting. So...
in the chat, Sarah says, starting is always the hard part. Giving folks somewhere to begin is super helpful. Which is, yeah, just what I was saying, but shorter and better. Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah.
Like, the next question that I did have was about, you know, like, having a goal for the group. Like how, you know, in Blades in the Dark, you are usually doing heists. Monster of the week, you are dealing with monster of the week, things like that. So I think already y'all have helped me with that in terms of, like, I could include hooks, because I have, like, this setting where inherently the player characters would probably be opposed to, like, the guard of the city that it's set in, but that to me is less of, like, a goal so much as just a fact of the world and opposition that might be faced. So I've been struggling with, like, how do I present a goal or something to bring the group together? And I think the idea of having different hooks listed, because, like, I can just churn out those. I've GM'd for years, you know, it's just, it becomes instinct. So I feel like I could provide, like, a list of potential ones there. Because I was trying to figure out, like, having a central focus. And I feel like it would be very hard to decide on one because I'm very indecisive, but y'all have already helped me with that.
Yeah, I think there's a cool thing, like you were talking about crew upgrades and crew, we've been talking about, like, the crew, is just, like, at character creation. Hey, here's a list of 10 things the group might be into, right? Like, choose 2 of them. And that helps the group with, like, sort of, like, cohesion. Like, this is what we're about from session 1. But also, like, sort of as GM implicitly tells you, like, what sort of things your characters want to see. Like if you're like,
Oh.
we're into heisting and we're into buying cute mascot outfits, and those are our two group goals, right? As a GM, it's like
Sanrio Bandits.
great, yeah, we're heisting cute outfits this one.
Yes. Keegan, I adore that. I think I often do that is one thing that I like to include is mechanics by which players can tell the GM what they're all about, because it makes it easy for the GM. And I believe in doing that. Josh has also mentioned, I don't know how much you like random tables, but a well put together random table or pick list could do some big heavy lifting for the GM in terms of hooks, adventure seeds, encounters, setting, and lore.
That's, I guess, a question that I would have is I don't like random tables. As a GM, I like to just like come up with my own stuff based off of little prompts in the book. But is that something that, I mean, I guess chat or y'all, is that something that you do find super helpful? Is like tables of things to draw on or random tables?
Yeah, I'll take that. I never use a random table. I'm not far from you here, but every time I have talked to people who don't do game design for a living, or like a lot of game design, and you ask them like, hey, do you like random tables that have like plot hooks on them? It's like, oh yes, they're so helpful. And I get the same answer literally every time.
I don't hate them. I typically prefer to pick from a table if I see a random table. But at the same time, there's something to be said for rolling the dice of being like, someone is murdered. The king. It's like,
yeah,
like
there's like
that moment is good.
And there's like this cute way to do it too, where you're like, okay, I don't like writing tables, right? But I do like writing plot hooks. And if you write 10 plot hooks, and then in front of them you put roll a d10, that's just a table. Sometimes a table's just a list of things.
That works because then I don't have to write around that either, like setting up each sentence.
Write 10 of them.
Yeah, you don't have to do you ran into blank at blank and they feel blank, right? Like sometimes the table is here's 10 plot hooks. Yeah.
Yeah, use the more roll.
Tables are really scary sometimes, and then you think about the fact that tables sometimes just one or two lists, and then they're not so bad.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I'll think about them like bulleted lists. I love bulleted lists. They're in like everything that I do every day.
Sarah in the chat, yes and no. I read the random tables, but I don't really use them unless I'm in a real tight bind, and even then I'm more likely to choose. Which is like a good way of saying too that like a good random table might never get used, but it might provide again like flavor and some sort of like implicit onboarding for people actually running the game.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I harp on a lot is like support your game master, because they're the reason your game gets played. The person who will run the game, unless you're playing a GM-less game, is the reason it gets played. So anything you could put in there to make their job easier, I'm all for.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And it's like, if it's a table, it doesn't really matter if it's like random or pick and choose, because if you make it a random table, that doesn't mean they can't pick and choose. So yeah, that makes sense.
Josh in the chat did ask a great question. Jumping off Sarah, have you considered different start of session or end of session procedures to onboard people during a session and calibrate expectations for the next?
So for starting like out of character expectations and like different goals.
Yeah, I know Josh well enough to say, I think this is stuff like in Apocalypse Keys at the start of session, each character sort of like has a goal. So like I'm currently playing an Apocalypse Keys game, and at the start of session I'm a vampire, and it's like I'll get these are the things my character might want to do this session, right? And it's like a list of 6, and then I'll choose one. So it'll be like, this session I'd like to ask somebody if I could feed on them, which just tells the GM like, hey, give me an NPC to talk to this session. But like that sort of thing where it sort of like, again, calibrates the table, sort of tells the GM what people are interested in, XYZ.
I think I've experienced that less in games that I've played. Like, I think the closest thing is that the newer, like, Lancer social system to it has you choose, like, a different, like, experience thing at the start that's like, oh, I talked with someone who found me interesting or something like that. So I hadn't really thought about that much, but, like, hearing it described, I think that sounds really useful, especially with, like, the like archetypes or classes that I'm looking at, because I feel like that could be a great way to balance the individuality of like having a specific character goal. So I think that's I hadn't considered it before just because I haven't interacted with that much, but like I think that is a good idea, and I mean, yeah, I think that would be a good thing to have. I'll probably end up doing that just because it sounds really useful.
It's been, I'll say, like, as a person playing a game, and I know my GM said much the same, it's been like really useful at just like not just me figuring out how I want to play a character each session, but like also sort of seeing where the heads of the other players are. It's been a real cool bit of tech. I'll send you a copy of Apocalypse Keys after this session. It's a good read that I think is doing a lot of the things you have questions about, which is just like
everything that I'm hearing is it's exciting.
Games. Not just you, just everybody.
Yeah.
Read more.
Yeah,
games.
everybody read more games, please. Everybody read them. That was kind of when we did last week's episode. I think Adam had given Jeffrey just a full reading list, just like a stack of homework. It was good. It was good. Do homework. So do you have more questions, Zoe? Questions?
Yes. This is like much less related to the rules themselves. But I'm wondering because it's a daunting task for me to go back and basically not even rewrite everything that I had. I'm basically like working from the ground up. Is there any way, because you have experience making all of these games, is there a way that you like to like structure how you go about something? Like, are you like, I'll work on, like when I'm writing,
you and I both had just the most visual, visceral reaction.
Yeah, I can see. Like when I'm writing fiction, you know, I start like with a big old outline, but I don't end up following it. So like, is there like a structure to things, or do you just kind of go based on what you're feeling?
I'm an actual nightmare. I'm not kidding when I say this, but my first probably 5 games, I wrote directly into layout in order.
Oh yeah, you're infamous for that.
Which, hey, that's a terrible. That's a terrible way to do it.
It's a
Don't
filthy
write
habit.
In order into it. Like I'd write intro, like safety tools, XYZ.
I write in order too, but
which is probably not the best way to do it. But no, I'm a disaster. I'll write things and then I'll come back the next day and I'll have at work written something new in my notepad and then I'll copy paste it in a different font onto the same document. It's a full nightmare. My editor hates me. If we weren't married, he would have fired me by now. I wish I could be more helpful here. I'm so sorry.
I have one of Kegan's sins, and only one, which is I also write from the beginning to the end. Because I wrote fiction very long time, so I'm used to starting at the beginning. That's what I'm used to. But one thing I found that has been very helpful is doing my headers first and then going down from beginning to end and filling out my headers.
Like section by section.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
I've started doing a little bit of, if I'm working on something and I'm like, oh, this reminds me I need to include rules for X, I'll make a new page for it on Google Docs and it'll just be titled like, mechanic for X, and then under it it'll have like half a sentence in a shitty little tone at myself that is hey, write this thing later, which at least then I don't forget to write it. Headers are great. I think that's the only advice me and Cat had.
Yeah, it's like I'll be like, you know, title of game. What is title of game? What you will need. Safety tools, your character. Usually I put that pretty early. but I struggle with structure a lot because I always feel like I'm putting everything in the wrong place. I can't get the number of notes I've written to myself that start with "Hey jackass," like absolutely untenable.
It's in italics in a different font, and it'll be like, "Hey bitch, put this here." You wrote this, didn't you? And it's like, I didn't. I'll do it now. Sorry.
See, the last page of the notebook that I wrote remarine in just says, "Now get to work."
I need that, like, poster above my desk. I feel like working with headers is a good idea, like figuring out the sections that I need first, because sometimes I'm like staring at a blank document and I'm like, where do I start? Like,
yeah,
because I'm very like a perfectionist, completionist. I'm like, I want to cover everything, and so I get stressed and I'm like leaving something out, or I'm starting at the wrong place. I mean, you mentioned still having that worry, but I feel like it makes sense because I can just like reorder my headers before I'm writing paragraphs and paragraphs of text first.
And honestly,
that makes sense.
Especially with longer things, I find not really super worrying about the order things are going in while you're writing is really helpful. Like, that is a problem for editing.
Yeah,
and
that is
even if you're editing, that's a problem for like future you is figuring out the order those things go in, because like especially as you write, those parts are going to evolve, and like do we include how characters are built, or do we include like lore first, or like age-old questions that nobody's ever going to agree on them, right?
Yeah. I usually start with like a pinch of lore and then move into character creation because the lore is there for context. But that's, again, Kegan's right. No one's going to have an answer to this. Sarah asked, do you think it makes sense to start with the parts of your game that excite you first? And typically what I do is I do like a notebook draft where I write down like the mechanics and the stuff in no order in a mess. And then when I'm typing it, it's from beginning to end, like a robot does. I would also like to add that not only is it a problem for editing, it is also a problem for layout. If you do a nice accessible layout with links to things and a good table of contents, you can put things in less optimal orders. And if players can get around easy, it's not going to be as big a burden.
I do want to say earlier in the chat, H Monk said, isn't a bunch of headers just making an outline? And I want to call out. Yeah,
that's absolutely a call out. Except that often my headers are inscrutable.
I feel like a bit of inscrutability is sort of the key to writing a game, right? Like, I think of the number of times I've written just a sentence that does not make any sense, and then been
the GM will figure it out.
The GM will screw it. The players will screw it.
When I was
That's
writing
where the play comes from.
In Extremis, one of the first things... So this is the thing I do with game design generally. Here's my secret, is I write a sentence I want somebody to be able to say at the table that I think sounds cool, and then I work backwards from it.
Oh, that kicks ass though, Kegan.
So in Extremis, one of the first sentences I wrote was, I want to burn a well to raise a skeleton. Right? And then I was like, what's a well? what's burning?
And
I did not have the answers to either of those questions until it was already in layout. I knew what a skeleton was.
So much ass. It's so nightmarish, but it kicks so much ass.
Honestly, unironically, knowing the sorts of things you want players to say has been cool, like a fun spot to work out of, but also it's a nightmare.
Oh, I fucking love it.
But game design's just setting up problems for you in 24 hours.
Yeah. Game design is just a series of problems you never solve. You just put a counterweight on by creating a different problem over here.
But if you create enough cool sentences,
right,
then nobody's going to look at the problem.
Unironically, right.
God, every episode without fail of this show, I feel as if I have my mind blown by a piece of wisdom. And I think this is the one for this episode, is just like start with the sentences you want players to say at the table and work backward. That kicks ass, Kegan. It's awful. It rules. I love it.
It's a really cool way to make a game that has like a bunch of evocative words in it, right? And it's maybe not a useful piece of advice for making a thing that's playable.
Yeah. Sarah says just chain dope shit together, you'll be fine. Which is...
That is actually genuinely helpful for me though, because like I like stray away from being like too indulgent in my like game creation. I'm like, if I use this word, then
again, making a game for players who play games like you. And to that, being really self-indulgent is going to be the sort of thing that sort of sets you aside from people who just like sort of like make a mass market game, right? Like there are a million like D&D clones in the world, but like also there's only one copy of Heart. And a lot of that I think really is just like sort of like being self-indulgent and also like understanding your vibe. Yeah.
It's like, have you ever watched a piece of media and just been like, who made this fucked up shit? It speaks directly to me. What kind of fucked up monster created this? Mine is Revolutionary Girl Utena. I think a lot of people feel that way about Utena. It's just like, this is fucked up. Why do I get it on such a deep level? And like, that's real. That's a real thing. Like, if you make fucked up shit that appeals to your fucked up brain, I say affectionately to everyone, then the other people who are like you and they are out there will read it and they'll have that tremendous feeling that this was made for me. So like, no. It kicks ass. Yeah, keep repeatedly saying in chat, the only horror movies that they like are art school dropout body horror films. It's call out time in the program. But it's true. It's just nobody is alone in the way that they're fucked up. Nobody's alone in it. And so making art that speaks to your particular brain is going to speak to someone else's brain too. 100%. I think that's perfect and beautiful. Fucking...
All right, Zoe, do you have
wisdom.
more questions? I know we're running.
Zoe, no, we're running dangerously close, but we've got time for another question from Zoe for more wisdoms.
I do have like one more question.
Perfect.
I would love to hear it.
Which is just, I have done obviously like play testing for the games that I have made in the past, but like for the umpteenth time, I reiterate that this is like a longer scale than the other games that I've made. So I'm wondering if you have any advice for like how to go about playtesting that, because it's like, should I have people make, characters who are pretty like far along, or should I like start with a first session essentially? Like, or is there a way that you guys like to go about it, like by splitting things up or something like that?
Yeah, I just went through this, so I'll happily talk about it. But so for playtesting anything mechanics heavy, there are sort of two spots you want to discover. One is it interesting playing like a like a level 1 character, which is to say you want to start at the beginning. You want to make sure advancement feels good. You want people to like make characters, see if that feels interesting. But you also, if you are planning on making a game that includes campaign play, there is like some point where you want to see like, how does the end of this game feel? And sometimes that is running just more playtests, some at like lower levels, some at higher levels. Sometimes, and like what I found works really well is doing a playtest, and then when people level up, like, okay, cool, we're gonna level up like 3 times, or like, choose a number. This is what the middle of the game is going to feel like, is what session 2 is. Session 3 is going to feel like this is like 10 sessions into a game. And then you still have some sort of like tracing the arc of the characters between them, so you can still sort of judge out how that feels, but you still get like a good sense of like beginning, mid, end of a campaign that way. But
Yeah,
also,
that makes sense.
just like big games just require a lot of playtesting.
They really do.
Or they require none. Like, to be fair, I don't playtest everything.
I've never regretted playtesting, but I do not consider it mandatory.
100% that.
Like, it's because God, it's such a time investment. My what Kegan said absolutely holds true. Do not skip level 1, because D&D is unplayable at level 1. It's just not fun. Like, it's possible to be so focused on where characters can go that you lose sight of making day 1, session 1 fun.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do not gloss over that in your testing.
Yeah, and I feel like that's got to be really important if you are not D&D. If it's like a game where it's like I feel like a week level 1, there's people will still be like, "Oh, we're here to play D&D." I'm making a random game that nobody has heard about, so I feel like it's got to be fun from the first session.
Yeah, unfortunately, like the standards for indie games are sort of fucked, right? And there are a million indie games out there, right? And sometimes, even if players will enjoy, session 3 is going to be great, and session 4 is going to be even better. Starting at session 1 can be hard. And if session 1 is difficult and it's not fun, they will move on to another game. There are a million of them. So like really honing in on session 1, so important.
Absolutely. 100,000 million %. So that's about taking us there. So as we prepare for our landing, Zoe, how are you feeling about it? About your project? How are you feeling about Ichorus right now?
I feel a lot more confident in like how to approach it, the direction I'm going, and also about how indulgent I'm being in writing it. I feel a lot more sure about where I'm going with it moving forward. And it's also just been great to hear even like the chat questions, what people are interested in or what they have concerns about, things like that. So this has been pretty awesome for me.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear it. I really am. Zoe, before we sign off, I would love for you to remind chat where they can find your existing work and where they'll be able to find Ichorus. So and who you are and your favorite things.
You can find all of my games on itch.io at Angel Eyes Games. And you can find me on the currently up in flames Twitter, also at Angel Eyes Games. And that's where I will probably also be posting about Ichorus while I'm working on it, maybe when it's out as well. I can't promise frequent updates because I don't do that on this Burning Dying platform, but I will definitely be posting when it is out. So that's where you can find my stuff.
All right. Love that. Kegan.
Yeah.
I would love for you to tell the audience about the places where your work can be found and the places where you as a person can be found and your favorite things.
Got you. Okay. I am and will probably continue to be KeganExe. You can find me online at KeganExe.com or streaming here on +1EXP, KeganExe.com. That has a link to all of my socials, but they're all KeganExe except for on X, where I will not be because I said I would be on Twitter till it burnt down, and I was. I think that's everything. Just go to my website.
Yeah.
It's easier to find me.
I have thank you so much. Thank you, Zoe, for coming on the show. This has been an absolute delight. I'm so excited to hear more about Ichorus as you work on it. Kegan, thank you so much for being our co-pilot today and for running the stream. Chat, can I get a big all caps thank you, Kegan? using the letter U in place of the word you is mandatory. Would you please? I'm going to wait a couple seconds for those to roll in.
And now we're going to wave at the camera and tell everyone bye.
There we go. There we go. Thank you, Kegan.
Bye, everyone.
Everyone have safely arrived at our destination. Remember that you can find our episodes on our YouTube if you've missed any. Thank you for flying with us today. And remember, your dreams don't have to stay grounded. You're clear for takeoff.